Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The investigative team known as Bellingcat have struck again. This time, working with a Russian organisation, The Insider, they identified the second man who travelled to Salisbury, tasked, according to the government, with murdering Sergei Skripal. Alexander Petrov is, it turns out, Alexander Mishkin, a doctor working for Russian military intelligence. Like his partner, a decorated officer. So why has Bellingcat and its network stolen a march on long-established media? These were the men that everyone was trying to find. After the attempted murder of the Skripals, the UK government announced the names of two Russians who entered the UK with passports under the names Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov. Their real names and identities were not revealed by MI6, nor the police, nor by investigative journalists at any established media organisation. They were found by a group of journalists you've probably never heard of.
The investigative website Bellingcat has revealed the name of the second suspect in the Salisbury Novichok poisoning case.
Bellingcat is a small operation with just 10 formal members of staff. So what is it that they and others like them are doing that enable them to beat mainstream media to huge stories? They mainly work from open source information freely available to anyone on the internet.
Open source journalism is about finding the information that already exists and that actually any of us could technically get. But it's as much about actually filtering the vast amount of irrelevant info and verifying the information as anything else. This is having a huge impact on journalism. Everyone has a voice now, everyone can reach a potential audience, and anyone can be effectively a citizen journalist. And that means that more and more journalism is being done outside of the profession of journalism. It has a huge impact actually on the kind of journalism work then that is actually done, because it will be done outside of professional standards, for better and for worse.
There's so many of us who can do this. We're going to keep going. And it's because of this new power we have, because of this revolution. It's a peaceful power, but it's also the power of truth. And in what seems like a post-truth society with Donald Trump and what else is happening in the world, it seems like it's really time that we need to do this together.
The internet has revolutionised the way we access information. Wikipedia averages more than 18 billion page views per month and can be edited by anyone. Crowd contribution is more important and more trusted than ever. So, could open source and citizen journalism lead to the same kind of revolution in traditional journalism?
I hope that mainstream media starts using the techniques that Bellingcat are using. The story is all too often out there, and we don't really find it. The techniques that they have developed are brilliant. And much like the BBC changing 5 or 6 years ago to embrace reporting on social media, I think it needs to change again now to actually embrace all the open source intelligence techniques, which might actually make the truth more visible to all of its viewers.
Well, here to discuss the rise of open source investigative reporting are Robert Trafford, a coordinator at the research group Forensic Architecture, who's worked closely with outlets like Bellingcat in the past, and Vera Tolz, a professor of Russian studies at the University of Manchester, who is an investigator on the Reframing Russia from Cold War to Information War project. Good evening to you both. Thanks very much for coming in. First of all, Robert, what methods do you and Bellingcat and others like Insider and so forth, and what methods do you use that are they very new? Are they actually quite old?
Well, I can understand why a story like this has sort of really brought these techniques into the mainstream. Obviously, it's an enormous story that Bellingcat have landed, but we've been doing this kind of work for 3 or 4 years, or even longer in some cases, and the techniques themselves have been available not only to the mainstream media, but to smaller organisations like ourselves and to citizen journalists for quite a long time now.
Yes, but what do you actually do? You're trawling through open sources available to us all, but it's the techniques that you employ to look for things.
Well, ourselves and Bellingcat and Air Wars and other organisations that operate in this field, you know, we all approach open source information in different ways. Forensic Architecture does a lot of image and video analysis and architectural analysis of open source material, and Bellingcat works with a great deal of sort of passport information and other data. But the very important thing is that this information has been online for such a long time. It's fascinating.
But we just haven't been able to navigate it before. You guys are the ones that have actually learned to navigate it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we'd be very excited to see the mainstream media catch up in that respect.
Well, I'm just going to go on to Vera in a second. Just one quick point on the accessing passport details. I think I might be right in saying that actually we can't just go in and access passport details, but you find it, and you guys can do that.
You'd have to talk to Bellingcat about exactly how they managed to do that.
Vera Tolz, before we come on to talk about how open source operates right now in Russia, first of all, you've been following RT, for example. I mean, how have RT been reporting this story all the way through?
Yeah, so first to say that, of course, the access to the passport information was obtained by Russian journalists, and it's very important to emphasize that basically all the legwork in identification of this to GRU agents has been done by very, very brave Russian journalists.
I was going to say, before I move on, just on that point, Vera, just on that point, at great danger to themselves, do you think?
Sorry, could you?
At great danger to themselves.
Yes, at great danger to themselves. And the first part of their investigation, I think, was quite, in a way, traditional investigative journalism. They managed to obtain the passport details of these two agents from their contacts in the Russian police. And then, proceeding from that, they started to do investigative work on just using open sources of the Russian internet. It's important to note that internet in Russia is censored, but only partially censored, not certainly as much censored as in China. So it is possible to do investigative journalism with online sources.
So how does traditional media, because you look at that too, with all the work that's going on, I would maybe call it guerrilla journalism in a way in Russia, sitting alongside state television, I mean, how does RT deal with this when they're being completely overtaken all the time as a state arm? How do they deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting that the domestic, for instance, Russian television, which is very strongly state-controlled, hasn't been really discussing very much these revelations, even though originally the Skripal poisoning story, with all the denials by the Russian side of the involvement, was very systematically covered. But these latest revelations have been ignored by state television. The story about the identification of Bashirov as Chipiga was reported by, for instance, RT, but RT, of course, is aimed at an international audience, and therefore it has to cover such revelations. RT is not really watched in Russia.
Let me put this back to let me put this back to Robert just for a minute. This idea as well, because what Vera is saying is that it's at great danger, but it's as if, you know, if one unit goes down, another pops up. There's always somebody there ready to step in and do the kind of work that Bellingcat does, that you have a kind of network. And I was wondering if one of the great attractions of open source, in a way, is that you show your workings, that people can see, and so therefore it kind of combats the idea of fake news. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, open source investigation is a kind of democratization of investigation. You know, you're very free to disagree with the conclusions of our work or of the work of Bellingcat, but since that information that led to those conclusions is available to me and to you and to any impartial observer, you have to explain exactly what's wrong with that information. And I think, to be honest, that's why the Russian state and its supporters look so hysterical when they deny and obstruct and sort of detract from the work of Bellingcat, because they can't attack the method, so they attack the man.
So, in fact, open source journalism, in a sense, becomes more trustable because you show us your workings all the way through and we can see what you're doing.
Absolutely, it's about transparency.
Thank you both very much indeed.